This judge, Randall Forester, a man steeped in the old ways of the courtroom, truly believed he could silence her, Jasmine Crockett, with a brutal $500 contempt fine, right there, in plain sight, in front of every single person packed into that tense courtroom. But what Jasmine Crockett, this calm, unyielding defense attorney, uttered next, what she revealed with quiet precision, didn't just rattle the room, it utterly flipped the entire dynamic, shattering the judge's composure and leaving him utterly, incredibly speechless. If you, like us, believe that the unvarnished truth absolutely needs to be told, that justice should never be silenced, then you must smash that like button right now and subscribe to our channel, because you truly, absolutely do not want to miss a single electrifying second of what comes next in this legal demolition. The courtroom, usually a bastion of cool, sterile order, was oddly warmer than usual that day. Not oppressively hot, but just warm enough to make people subtly shift in their seats, to tug at their collars, creating an undercurrent of discomfort. There was something in the air, a palpable tension that made you want to clear your throat, even if you had nothing to say, an unspoken anticipation hanging heavy. Jasmine Crockett, poised and collected, stood at the defense table, one hand resting lightly, almost casually, on a stack of meticulously organized folders. Her other hand remained at her side, a picture of calm and sharp focus. There wasn't a single wrinkle on her perfectly pressed gray slacks, not even a bead of sweat dared to form on her brow, despite the building pressure. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, never once left Judge Randall Forester's face, tracking his every subtle shift. Forester, a formidable figure, was a man infamous for two defining traits: his notoriously short patience and his disturbingly long memory. He harbored a deep-seated belief that civil rights arguments were archaic relics, belonging only in dusty textbooks and having no place whatsoever in the vibrant, active courtrooms of today. On the other side of that divide were her clients, a diverse group including Marissa Elkins, a local art teacher with her distinctive cat-eye glasses and ever-present sketchpad. There were also two earnest college students, a hard-working postal worker, and a gentle community gardener named Daryl, who, due to a heart condition, struggled with standing for extended periods. None of them looked dangerous. They simply looked tired, anxious, burdened by the realization that speaking up could carry a hefty personal cost. This wasn't merely another routine day in court. It was rapidly escalating into a high-stakes showdown, pitting the raw, often unchecked power of authority against the quiet, unyielding force of truth, represented by a woman who refused to be intimidated. The very moment Judge Forester allowed his voice to rise, a subtle but unmistakable tension rippled through the entire room, making everyone involuntarily tense. "Ms. Crockett," he intoned, his voice rigid with thinly veiled irritation, "this court unequivocally does not entertain political speeches disguised as mere legal arguments." His words hung in the air, a clear warning. "You've been warned once. If you persist in continuing down this path, I will, without hesitation, find you in contempt of this court." Yet Jasmine didn't even flinch. Her composure was unshakable. "Your Honor," she responded, her voice calm but firm, "with all due respect, this is not politics. This is precedent." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "And I am asking this court to recognize the critical difference between the two." Forester leaned back in his imposing chair, his lips pressed into a tight, disapproving line. He glared at her, eyeing her with the intense scrutiny of someone who had just been informed that their most cherished, inviolable rule was being brazenly challenged, perhaps even bent. "You've been practicing law long enough, Miss Crockett, to know better than this," he snapped, his voice laden with a patronizing tone. Then with a sudden dismissive flourish, he declared, "500, contempt of court." The announcement of the fine resonated through the room like a sharp, unexpected slap, eliciting gasps from some, murmurs from others. But Jasmine remarkably remained utterly motionless, her composure undisturbed. The bailiff dutifully scribbled notes on his pad, while the court clerk paused, glancing up, her eyes wide with surprise. A young law student, observing from the back, whispered incredulously to his friend, Did she just get fined for citing case law? Jasmine, unfazed, calmly cleared her throat. Then I respectfully request the court's rationale for the fine, she stated, her voice even and clear, so it may be meticulously reviewed as part of the appellate record. Forester blinked, visibly taken aback. He was unaccustomed to being questioned, especially not in such a precise, unyielding manner from the bench. He could typically sense fear in those before him, but Jasmine exhibited none. Her tone was perfectly measured, her eyes laser-focused, her voice remarkably steady. "Excuse me?" he uttered, more a challenge than an actual question. "You find me for contempt," she calmly reiterated. "I'm asking for the court's reasoning so it can be entered into the record, should it be necessary for review." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. You could almost feel the tension humming in the sudden, profound silence that enveloped the room. A few feet away, the prosecutor, Leland Briggs, a notorious by-the-book type, began theatrically flipping through his own notes, as if to broadcast, "Not my problem." He pointedly didn't look up. "You're bordering on disrespect," the judge warned, his voice laced with renewed authority. "And you're bordering on suppressing a valid defense?" Jasmine shot back, her voice still perfectly calm, still utterly measured. "I'm not raising my voice. I'm not making speeches. I'm quoting federal case law and simply asking the court to hear the facts." She paused, then delivered the cutting blow. "If that's contempt, then we've all lost something far bigger than just $500. Someone in the gallery audibly exhaled, a nervous laugh escaping before silence descended once more. Judge Forester stared at her for a long, drawn-out moment, his mouth opening as if to speak, then snapping shut. "Move on," he finally conceded, his voice strained, "before I make it 1,000 ones." But the shift in the room was undeniable. Something profound had happened. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't backed down, and somehow, without ever raising her voice, she had forced everyone, including the judge, to sit up and pay attention. The judge looked undeniably irritated, but also distinctly unsure, caught in that rare moment when an authority figure feels a subtle crack forming beneath their feet, uncertain if it's from their own misstep or the unyielding force standing before them. If you think that judge was seriously out of line, hit that like button right now. And then, the moment that utterly shattered everything, the bombshell that would reverberate far beyond the courtroom's hushed silence. Jasmine, with an almost imperceptible movement, flipped to the final, crucial page of her notes, her fingers barely brushing the paper. But her voice, though still even and calm, carried every single ounce of the crushing weight it needed, every nuance of its devastating impact. "There's one more case I'd like to introduce into the record, Your Honor," she declared, her gaze slowly sweeping across the now captivated courtroom, her voice never once losing its composed tone. "Donovan v. Metro PD, Ninth Circuit, 2016. Judge Forester, visibly intrigued, raised an eyebrow. "That case was dismissed on procedural grounds, Miss Crockett," he stated, a hint of challenge in his voice. "It was," Jasmine calmly nodded, acknowledging his point directly. "But the powerful language used by the appellate court, in their opinion, established a critical standard," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "A standard, Your Honor, that aligns perfectly with what happened right here today." Briggs, the prosecutor, let out a dismissive scoff. "Now she's reciting case language from a case that didn't even proceed to a final judgment?" he muttered, clearly attempting to undermine her. "It's not the outcome I'm citing, Mr. Briggs," Jasmine stated, turning to face him directly, her composure unwavering. "It's the court's precise interpretation of how officers are meant to handle protests on publicly accessible private property. The court explicitly warned against vague orders and reactive policing, which, Your Honor, is exactly what Officer Walsh did in this instance." Forester leaned forward, his elbows now resting on the bench, suddenly more alert, his full attention now fixed on her. "You're telling me," he began, his voice laced with skepticism, "that a single paragraph in a dismissed case should somehow override current Texas law?" "No, Your Honor," she countered, her voice firm. "I'm telling you that the law isn't solely about punishment, it is fundamentally about protection." Her words resonated with a quiet power. And when we allow weak cases to simply slide by with a rubber stamp, we not only normalize sloppy arrests, but we create a dangerous precedent. Suddenly, anyone standing outside with a sign becomes a criminal, even if they're quietly reading from a notebook on what should be considered a public sidewalk. Briggs folded his arms, visibly frustrated. He knew he was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. But Jasmine pressed on, relentlessly, calmly. She walked slowly toward the front of the room, stopping just short of the jury box, her presence commanding attention. "My client, Daryl, has serious heart problems," she stated, her voice softer now but no less impactful. "He sat down to protest precisely because standing too long could send him straight back to the emergency room." He said nothing, made no threats. The officer didn't bother to ask questions. He just grabbed him. The same goes for Marissa. She was dragged by her wrist as if she were resisting, but she wasn't. She was simply reading a profound quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when Officer Walsh pulled her up. She paused, her gaze sweeping over to the judge. "Your Honor, I am fully aware that this courtroom has seen far worse crimes, and I know there are indeed bigger cases on your docket." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it filled the room. "But if the justice system itself cannot take these seemingly small moments seriously, these crucial moments where ordinary people are punished simply for daring to be visible, for exercising their fundamental rights, then what truly is the point of any of this?" It was quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't awkward. It was deeply contemplative, as if everyone in the room was recalibrating their understanding of justice. Judge Forester looked down, his gaze fixed on the arrest reports, a deep crease forming between his eyebrows. His fingers stopped at one particular name, Marissa Elkins. "Miss Elkins," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Marissa, nervous, stood, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." "You're the one who was reading from a book when you were arrested?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she confirmed. "From a collection of speeches. I didn't move when he spoke because I simply didn't hear him clearly. It was incredibly loud on the street that day." Forrester turned back to Jasmine. "You say all of this is on video?" "Yes, sir," she affirmed. "We've submitted the footage and meticulously time-stamped Officer Walsh's commands versus the physical arrests. You will clearly see, Your Honor, that he begins grabbing protesters a mere 4 seconds after issuing his warning. There was no loudspeaker, no second chance given." Forrester leaned back once more, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. But his voice was now quieter than before, almost subdued. "And you're requesting dismissal of all 6 charges?" "I am, Your Honor," she stated firmly, "on grounds of unlawful arrest, blatant suppression of free speech, and a clear misuse of police authority. My clients were simply exercising a fundamental constitutional right in a publicly accessible space, and they were unlawfully penalized purely because their presence, their message, made someone uncomfortable." The judge didn't speak. He stared intently at the folder in front of him, and for a fleeting moment, Jasmine could clearly perceive it. A subtle flicker, not quite regret, but a profound reconsideration. It was as if he had just realized that the very ground he had believed to be unshakably solid had a gaping crack running straight through its foundation. He reached for his gavel, but, to everyone's surprise, he didn't bring it down. Instead, he looked directly at Jasmine. "I'll take the motion under advisement." She nodded once, respectfully, no trace of a smile, no sigh of relief, just absolute stillness. Briggs remained silent, as did the clerk, but the room itself felt undeniably different now, transformed not just by what had been said, but because no one was looking at Jasmine as if she were the problem anymore. But just when the dust seemed to settle, just when the tension began to ebb, Judge Forester, with a deliberate motion, opened the file one last time. And what he read next, a single overlooked detail, changed absolutely everything, triggering a true meltdown in the courtroom. Judge Forester, with an almost mechanical precision, flipped through the thick folder. Page after page of tedious arrest reports, terse witness statements, and seemingly innocuous supporting documents passed under his gaze. Then, without warning, he paused, his brow furrowing deeply in concentration. It was a minuscule detail, cleverly buried deep in the back of the packet. An affidavit, signed by none other than Gerard Blanche, the building security manager from Northern Star Oil. Jasmine, ever the meticulous strategist, had already read it, not once, but twice. She knew precisely what was coming, like a slow-motion car crash for the prosecution. This statement, Forester began, his voice slow, deliberate, as he lifted the page with just 2 fingers, as if it were a fragile, damning artifact. This came from the property manager? Yes, Your Honor, Jasmine replied, her voice calm and clear. His name is Gerard Blanche. He signed the affidavit the morning directly after the arrests occurred. Did you submit this? Forrester probed, his eyes now narrowed on Jasmine. No, Your Honor, she responded. It was submitted by the prosecution itself. Briggs, the prosecutor, visibly stumbled, blinking in disbelief. Yes, Your Honor, he stammered, caught completely off guard. It came with the initial packet from the department. Forrester, his voice now gaining a dangerous edge, began to read aloud, each word a hammer blow. At the time of the protest, the building entrances were not obstructed and no physical damage was observed. Protesters remained seated on the front steps and did not interfere with foot traffic or business operations. Police were not requested by property management, but appeared after a phone call from a private tenant on the 5th floor. He stopped, the courtroom now in a state of absolute, stunned silence. Then he reread the critical line again, even slower, allowing the full weight of its meaning to sink into every shocked ear. Police were not requested by property management. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, desperately trying to salvage the rapidly sinking ship. Your Honor, that doesn't mean the protest was legal, he blurted out, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. No, Forrester retorted, his voice now sharper, cutting through Briggs's protest like a knife. But it does mean the arresting officer didn't have any direct instruction or authorization from the building's ownership or management, which, Mr. Briggs, raises a very crucial question. Why did he escalate so quickly? He looked directly at Jasmine, and for the very first time since the trial had begun, his gaze held not annoyance, but a genuine, piercing curiosity. She didn't press her advantage. She simply allowed the damning silence to hang heavy in the air, doing its work. Then he turned back to Briggs, his tone chillingly calm. Did you question Officer Walsh about this discrepancy? No, sir, Briggs stammered, completely outmaneuvered. I relied on the arrest reports, which, Forrester concluded, his voice low and dangerous, directly contradicts this crucial statement. Briggs's mouth opened, then slowly closed again, utterly defeated. Forrester turned to the bailiff. Pull up the video on the evidence monitor. Now. A few taps later, the footage, though slightly shaky, began to play, starkly clear on the screen. The sound of passing cars, a few distant voices in the background. Then Officer Walsh stepped into the frame, speaking with what sounded like urgency, but utterly devoid of a megaphone or microphone, barely audible over the street noise. And then Marissa's voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the ambient noise. And that's why the voices of the people must not be ignored. Instantly, Walsh's hand shot out, grabbing her. Another protester stood in shock, then was pulled up next. No second warning, no chance to comply. Forrester leaned back again, his expression now completely unreadable. The entire room watched him, not the video, hanging on his every reaction. Then he looked at Jasmine. You wrote a memo on Holder versus Community Network in law school? She blinked, surprised. Yes, Your Honor, she confirmed. How do you know that? He held up the very same affidavit, now flipped to the back. Gerard Blanche mentioned your name, he explained. He said you represented a tenant of his in a discrimination claim 7 years ago. Said you dismantled their argument in court without ever raising your voice. The courtroom suddenly felt impossibly smaller, the weight of the moment crushing. Didn't mention that, he said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Why? I didn't think it was relevant, Your Honor, she stated simply. He studied her face for a long, contemplative moment. You know the law, he said, his voice slow, almost reflective, and you know how to apply it without theater. That's rare. Then he turned to a visibly defeated Briggs. I'm dismissing the charges, he declared, his voice firm and decisive. All 6, based on insufficient grounds for arrest and failure to meet the burden of proof regarding unlawful assembly. Bang! The gavel slammed down, echoing through the stunned silence. Gasps erupted, followed by a few stunned glances. Daryl, the gardener, put his head in his hands, tears of relief welling up. Marissa, the art teacher, let out a quiet laugh that quickly transformed into a choked sob of pure emotional release. Jasmine, unmoving, simply stood there, her eyes locked on the bench as if her work wasn't entirely finished. Forester cleared his throat, a sound of rare discomfort. As for the earlier fine for contempt, he announced, his voice almost reluctant, I'm striking it from the record. Silence descended once more. You've made your point, Miss Crockett. She looked him directly in the eye, and for a fleeting moment, a subtle recognition, almost a concession, passed between them. He nodded barely, as if the gesture physically pained him. But the battle wasn't truly over until the story resonated beyond those walls. In a matter of minutes, the entire internet exploded with the news. This wasn't just a local court victory. It was a brutal public implosion for anyone who believed authority was beyond reproach. The hashtag #ChureJusticeForProtestors immediately shot to the top of trending topics worldwide, becoming a rallying cry for civil liberties. Memes comparing Judge Forester to a cartoon villain, a judge who thought he could silence free speech, flooded TikTok, demonstrating the sheer absurdity of his initial stance. Tweets from other public figures, from progressive politicians to firebrand commentators, echoed Jasmine's quiet triumph. Even usually loyal allies on conservative news networks like Fox News found themselves in an impossible position, struggling to defend the indefensible, awkwardly shifting narratives to avoid acknowledging the clear misuse of power that had been exposed. Meanwhile, CNN and MSNBC ran breathless segments, hailing Jasmine Crockett as a quiet hero, a fearless defender of the First Amendment. News channels across the spectrum scrambled to cover the story, from the meticulous legal breakdowns on specialized channels to the more sensationalist takes on primetime news, all illustrating the massive, undeniable dimension of the event. But the true firestorm wasn't just on TV, it was in the comments sections, on Reddit threads, in private group chats, where countless individuals shared their own harrowing experiences with similar injustices, all sparked by Jasmine's unyielding fight. The world wasn't just watching this brutal takedown, it was actively participating in the dismantling of a flawed system, piece by piece, fueled by collective outrage and a thirst for real justice. But this profound moment, this courtroom demolition, was never just about a heated exchange or a judge being outmaneuvered. It was about the inherent fragility of entrenched power when it is unflinchingly confronted with unvarnished truth. Judge Forester, blinded by his own authority and underestimating his opponent, made the classic, fatal error of dismissing Jasmine Crockett as just another voice in the crowd talking too much. He believed his gavel was a hammer and she was merely a nail to be driven down, but he gravely miscalculated. Jasmine didn't bring anger or theatrics to the fight. She brought a legal wall, unyielding and without cracks, built brick by brick with facts, with precedent, with the very language of the law itself. Her strategy wasn't to be loud, but to be solid, consistent, and meticulously prepared, even when no one else thought it mattered. This moment won't just define Judge Forester's legacy as a man whose authority crumbled under the weight of truth. It will fundamentally redefine the rules of engagement in civil rights cases, serving as a brutal reminder that power without responsibility is a dangerous, ultimately unsustainable illusion. The long-term consequences will ripple through the legal system, inspiring countless others to stand firm, to speak truth to power, and to demand accountability, ensuring that the next time, the justice system truly works for everyone, not just those in charge. Ultimately, what we collectively witnessed today was far more than a simple legal debate. It was a potent, unmissable warning. The truth, when delivered with quiet courage, with unshakable conviction, and with irrefutable evidence, remains the single most powerful weapon in the arsenal of justice. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It simply needs to be enduring, to hold steady, to last. But what do you think? Do you believe Judge Forester deserved this profound public reckoning? Did Jasmine Crockett deliver the kind of justice we desperately need? Share your powerful opinions in the comments section below. We want to hear every single one of them. And if you are committed to continuing to see power relentlessly confronted, if you believe in the pursuit of real, unvarnished fairness, then make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate those notifications. Because the next bombshell, the next moment of truth, the next brutal takedown of injustice could quite literally explode at any given moment.